It's now been 2 years since Britain completed its withdrawal from the European Union, and it's still struggling with the fallout.
Did you vote to leave?
Yes.
Are you happy with how Brexit has gone?
No.
It was never a good idea. It was never a good idea, but it was the will of the people.
I feel betrayed and really quite let down by a government that promised much and delivered nothing.
Doctors have stopped coming, and the nurses, we are so down now, it's awful, isn't it?
It's been an unmitigated disaster. Absolute disaster.
Now, however, this year, we've seen a change. People are talking about it more. You heard those complaints in the piece.
A very particular idea of sovereignty over economic good sense.
We couldn't ship anything to the EU, nothing.
It's bordering on disastrous. The Brexiteers haven't really formulated a cogent case as to why Brexit is going to deliver a dividend.
There is a political conspiracy of silence around the effects of Brexit. It spans the government, it spans the Labour Party.
Make Brexit work. The UK's decision to leave the European Union is an act of economic self-harm. In terms of prices, investment, and in terms of trade, we're seeing negative effects, not a pandemic effect, not an energy crisis effect. These are very clearly Brexit effects.
Stung by inflation and bracing for tax increases, the country is in the midst of its gravest slump in a generation, leading many to wonder how much the split with the European Union is to blame. 6.5 years after voting to leave the European Union, 3 years after the formal departure, 2 years after signing a post-Brexit trade deal with Brussels, and 1 month after installing its fourth Prime Minister since the 2016 referendum, Britain is caught in, what else? Another debate over Brexit. Brexit may be in the history books, but regret, as the British newspapers have called it, is back in the air. The cause of the remorse is clear: Britain's economic crisis, which is the gravest in a generation and worse than those of its European neighbours. Not all, or even most, of the problems are because of Brexit, but Britain's vexed trade relationship with the rest of Europe indisputably plays a role. That makes it a ripe target for an anxious public casting about for something to blame. The latest eruption of this never-ending drama began last week with an opinion poll that showed support for Brexit had fallen to its lowest level yet. Only 32% of those surveyed in the poll, by the firm YouGov, said that they thought leaving the European Union was a good idea. 56% said it was a mistake. The Brexit second-guessing grew louder this week, after the Sunday Times of London published a report that Prime Minister Rishi Sunak was considering pursuing a closer arrangement with the European Union, modelled on that of Switzerland. The Swiss have access to the single market and fewer border checks, in return for paying into the bloc's coffers and accepting some of its rules. Mr. Sunak quickly shot down the report, which was attributed to senior government sources. Under my leadership, Mr. Sunak told business executives on Monday, the United Kingdom will not pursue any relationship with Europe that relies on alignment with EU laws. I voted for Brexit. I believe in Brexit, Mr. Sunak added. I know that Brexit can deliver, and is already delivering, enormous benefits and opportunities for the country. In a forecast released last week alongside Mr. Sunak's new budget, a fiscal watchdog group, the Office for Budget Responsibility, said that Brexit had exerted a significant adverse impact on Britain's trade. It has also exacerbated labor shortages across businesses as diverse as London restaurants and trucking companies. While some of that is because of Britons who left their jobs during the coronavirus pandemic and have not yet rejoined the labor force, a sort of economic long COVID, employers are also struggling to replace workers from Europe who went home after Brexit and did not return.
I think most people are disappointed with Brexit because they expected this huge economic boom, but the reality is Brexit hasn't really materialized in the way anyone expected. You know, we had two options. We could have gone for a clean break and gone for a completely deregulated market like the Singaporeans have, or we could have gone for sort of a Norwegian or even Swiss style of our relationship with the EU, where we're close, but we're in, but not really. But at the moment, we have this really disjointed kind of combination of the two. And I think the real problem is, you know, for the Scots, even though Nicola Sturgeon's hope of calling a second Scottish independence referendum were tarnished by the Supreme Court yesterday, the reality is most Scots that are pushing for Scottish independence is because they want to rejoin the EU. So it's not just a matter of, you know, regret and people regretting voting for Brexit. It's also the fact that the union could be destroyed and broken up, because if we don't get, you know, a real Brexit deal sorted and we know where the direction of the country is going, you will have countries wanting to leave the union.
Absolutely. This is having a very big economic impact, especially on British small businesses. It is just so much more difficult to do business with the EU. There are customs checks, there are inspections, delays, problems with paying taxes. It has really led to a drastic drop in business between the two blocs. And you have to say it's also more difficult for EU businesses as well to import British goods, to hire British workers, to establish those relationships, because the UK is no longer in that EU single market.
It is not an accident that public sentiment began to swing against Brexit a year ago, when Britain suffered an acute shortage of truck drivers, which caused delays in deliveries of fuel to gas stations and long lines of motorists. That ended a honeymoon earlier in the year, when the government claimed, dubiously, that its swift approval and rollout of a COVID vaccine was thanks to Brexit. Since then, Britain has been gripped by double-digit inflation, rising interest rates, and a recession that the Bank of England recently warned could last 2 years. Among the group of 7 advanced countries, Britain is the only one with an economy that is smaller now than it was before the pandemic started. It was recently overtaken by India as the world's 5th largest economy. But Mr. Sunak, Sir Keir Starmer, and Sir Ed Davey may find it increasingly hard to ignore the consequences of Brexit during 2023, and the growing clamour for clarity on what fixing the mess might look like.